Evening and welcome once again to Gaming Under the Influence. I'm Mike here with Alex, coming to you from GreenDragonCVR in Woodbridge to talk about video games. How are you, bro?
Ooh, yeah, I'm doing good, man. How are you?
Not bad at all. Still working my way through Metal Gear Solid 3 and dreaming about playing a Xenoblade or Saga or Gears of some kind after I've done that.
Nice.
Yeah. What about you, man?
Fantastic game. I'm kind of playing my way through Elden Ring. I started a new game in, I guess, in anticipation of the DLC coming through soon. So giving me enough time to hopefully clear through most of it, and then I'll pick up on the DLC when it drops. So that'll be nice.
Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that
can't go wrong.
All this time immersed in Miyazaki and Kojima and Vanillaware games over the past few months.
Oh, yeah.
It's got me thinking about the importance of video game authorship, which is something we touched on in the past, but I would like to revisit today and maybe give a list of our top video game authors.
Yeah, definitely.
Before the video is through. Maybe a brief word on what this concept entails, though, because I don't think many people have heard of it before, you know?
Yeah, it's not something that you immediately, kind of think of at all in the video game space because, you know, there's writers, I guess, but not technically authors. And I think when we say authors, we really mean figures that are like people like producers and directors, you know? That's right. That kind of thing.
Yeah, this concept, you know, that things like a game have an author. It's appropriated from film criticism from the 60s. It's called auteur theory. It's just the French word for author. It came from this Parisian film magazine. It was brought to the English-speaking world by a guy called Andrew Sarris. And the most important part of this theory is that, you know, and you may disagree based on your views about the world, which is something that obviously is beyond the scope of this video. But, you know, I think even people who do disagree for philosophic reasons, they end up nodding in agreement when they actually go to watch or read or interpret something. They agree that it has meaning. So I think that the most important part of this theory is that the work is not, the artwork that is, the game, the movie, whatever, is not like a bag of rocks or you know, dust in the wind. It's not like an aggregate of parts that don't have any organic unity. It's more like a body filled with cells that relate to each other, and it lives and it has a cohesive unifying form, you know, an organic unity. I think that's the most important concept here. And what this means, if the thing does have an organic unity, which you can go and like look at its exterior parts, you know, its colors and its playable matter, and and you know, see that meaning through that. Supposing it does have this, you know, it needs to proceed from the mind of an artist, a singular guy whose concept, that thing outside of his mind, comes to reflect, comes to embody. And you know, this is probably intuitive, but the reason that's necessary is because somebody can't give something to something else that it doesn't have, you know. I can't it's like when people tell me to vote, right? Vote for change. Buddy, the system can't offer you what it is not. It doesn't make sense, right? The kettle can't offer you what is not black. You know, water can't offer you what's not wet. And I think in the same line of reasoning, causally speaking, to say the thing has this characteristic, you know, an aggregate of parts don't have that characteristic to give, right? No. It's an admission that the thing is conjoined to its creator to say that it has some kind of organic unity. And so the admission of organic unity causes us to turn to the author, the French guy would say. We're going to say the author, you know. And as you said, this doesn't mean the guy who writes the script. He may like Kojima and Miyazaki, but this is not important. You know, he may have somebody else write the script. The important thing is that the entire work, its organic unity, the way all the parts relate to each other, they do so in virtue of his concept. His concept is the form or meaning of the work. And I think, you know, the most apt comparison is the way an architect conceives and designs a building, and then a workforce goes and constructs the building.
Of course. You need somebody to do that kind of building work, right? Whether it's development tasks, or...
Right? It's not like a painter or the writer of a novel where the conception and execution takes place in the same person. And I think the reasoning is, you know, clear. It's the reason why that is clear because, you know, written words and pigment on a canvas, these are relatively modest matter. One man can master these and work upon them himself, but constructing a cathedral as much as a modern video game is not something that one man can possibly complete on his own, you know, without many different specialized workmen in their own order. You know? But it doesn't change the fact that other people are involved, that those people stand in relation to the architect as instruments. They're executing his concept. They're not the artist. He's the artist. They're the workmen, you see? They're the nurses of his concept, his child. It's born from his mind. They receive it and bring it into adulthood, but it's his concept, right? And I think analogously, this is what separates excellent games like Kojima games, Miyazaki games, you know, from
just the regular run-of-the-mill slop.
It's like Hemingway or
design,
Tolkien or whatever, you know, novelist you like to lionize compared to airport novels, Dan Brown and what have you, right? Like
Stephanie Meyers.
The auteur guys called people who weren't auteurs, they called them masters of scene, and they use this term disparagingly, like it's intended to signify that you may be good at constructing an image, like this or that scene, this or that thing. There's always this guy Saris, he made an incredibly good point that's relevant here. There's always more to the movie than the art. Movies, just by their nature, they always have colors and technical aspects you can sit there and admire. It's more true for a video game. The worst game will have many beautiful mechanical and artistic components just in the virtue of the medium. You always get more than what you came for, you could say. But again, it doesn't change the fact that the defining characteristic of a great one that's alive in a way that the airport novel is not, is the fact that it has a form born in the mind of the artist. You know? And that being said, you know, the question arises, in video games, who are these guys? Yeah. And I already gave myself away a little bit, but I think it gets a lot more interesting when we try and consider the less obvious cases.
It's I guess it gets pretty obvious if you listen to our channel at all. You'll know the first pretty much two most important and the top guys are.
In the first place, we have to say with most people on the earth who know what video games are, like the guy who comes to mind first is Kojima, of course.
Definitely Kojima.
Everybody knows who he is, and for good reason, right? I think he's achieved a stature in the industry that nobody else has, and it's the reason he's running an independent AAA studio, which is not. Does that exist elsewhere?
There's definitely a reason why he is where he is, and no, he's kind of in a unique situation, I guess, where he founded his studio with the help of. I guess he got funding from Sony and stuff like that for Death Stranding. But at the end of the day, he's just been producing hit after hit over the years. He doesn't miss, right? So and I think he deserves to be where he is, and without a doubt, any game that he's touched, we've pretty much loved, right? And
I think so.
Had pretty mostly universal acclaim. Maybe with the exception of. A little bit of Death Stranding, but I feel like that also
people have come around.
Yeah, exactly.
Now nobody remembers it that way, but
because it was, I guess it was easy to meme on it when it came out.
Nobody understood it.
Yeah,
I loved that game when it came out.
Great game, fantastic.
I think that Kojima games, when they're his games, even if you don't like them. Like, you can look at them and know they're his games, not only for the contribution of that artist. What's his name?
Shinkawa? No.
Yoji Shinkawa.
Yoji Shinkawa?
Who's left Konami to persist with him at Kojima Productions. And I think his art is integral, like we just mentioned. He's like the eternal foreman of Kojima's workforce. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's probably one of the most important contributors to the execution of his vision.
I'd say, There's a reason he followed him and has been with him. They've been kind of a duo there.
Yes. Shuyo Murata. That's the co-writer, and Yoji Shinkawa is the art direction, Yoji Shinkawa is also an important one at Kojima Productions for the art. But I think the defining thing about Kojima games, they err on the side of like cinematic video game execution, I would say, right? I like to conceive of the way video games convey their worlds, on the spectrum, and on one side is Kojima, the cinematic side, and on the other side is Miyazaki, erring on the totally other side.
True.
And part of Kojima's unique authorial vision, I think, is his reliance on tropes and images and style from cinema, and even obscure cinema.
I think the cool thing about Kojima is you actually want it to be in movies, and you kind of see that through his games, that he treats them like movies in a certain way. But also, they're not, like, he's no slouch in the gameplay department either, right? His games also play well and have a lot of complicated gameplay systems. So it's not, I would say, like how you said they're more cinematic than like a Kojima, than a Miyazaki game, obviously. But they're also not quite at the level of, let's say, like a Sony game. That's, what I mean?
I don't even mean necessarily like with the movies, rather that even when you're playing, like it's about like this carefully curated segment, like the camera angle and the way the dialogue is unfolding. It's always like intended to, carry you through a plot sequence in the way that a movie would, right?
Definitely, yeah.
It's not like the kind of free form gameplay that you usually find in a Miyazaki game where like the details have to come to you by your own effort.
Yeah.
They're out in the world, right? You're not directed to them.
No, yeah.
And it feels like the Kojima style is to curate your every look at the world almost, right?
Yeah.
Even in Metal Gear Solid 5 where you have a comparatively free
like an open world
you have comparative freedom to just explore the world at will. You still have this like reliance on like I feel like the thing is shuttered with cinematic elements, like when you land from the helicopter, you got to call in the helicopter to leave, like the way people are alerted and it focuses the camera on something. It's pretty cool how he retains that flair in all of the things he does. But I think when I think about Kojima games, the idea that I think characterizes all his works, from Death Stranding through the Metal Gear ones, and even to a lesser extent the Zone of the Enders games that he produced, I think he has there's this idea in mythology of the poetic universal, this one guy calls it, this guy Vico. And what that is pre-modern man, he didn't have philosophic concepts that he could make abstractions of, like justice and God and law and things like that, fear of the divine. So he only thought in sensible images, and he lumped together all kinds of people and things into these images that shared this characteristic. It functioned as like a universal for somebody who couldn't think of universals, Okay. And that's like, he says the first and most important poetic universal was Zeus or Jove or whatever, that this ancient Indo-European god with a lightning bolt who struck the fear of God into people and allowed them to build cities and laws and respect one another beyond their initial impulses and desires, right? And I think that what I see in Kojima is a reliance on exactly this modality of storytelling. Like the characters in his games are not merely themselves. They're supposed to be exemplifications of forces or ideas or feelings out in the world,
Yeah, that's good. They almost seem like biblical figures.
Yeah, or gods really or archetypes, They're like universals. They're not supposed to just be themselves. They're supposed to exemplify something about reality or society or something like that, Like in Death Stranding, I think you have like Amelie, the lady who's literally death, right?
Yeah.
Sam Porter Bridges, and it's all kinds of ways you could take that one, but I mean, his name is a job description. You know what I mean? And I think Porter is probably a bit too literal of a take. Like he's supposed to be some kind of like eternal wanderer or something like that, right? I really do like how this is the one persistent aspect of his world building. Like Kojima's focus is almost like on how ideas become incarnate in people, and obviously this is most prominent in Metal Gear Solid 3, where the bosses are all like supposed to be aspects of a soldier's personality, gone haywire and taken on human form, right? They scream out their name while it's like Japanese kabuki theater. It's like overly dramatized, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of like, I used to think too, like this is so silly when I was a young man, but I understand
it's intentional though.
It's literally like kabuki theater, where like there's all this exaggerated gestures and stuff like that, and the purpose of conveying the idea. And again, it makes sense in terms of this like character as a universal, an exemplification of something outside of himself. But I really like that about his world building. The cinematic flair on the one hand in terms of style and mechanics, and on the other hand, this focus on like mythologizing aspects of 20th century warfare, the way that the Greeks would do with their gods. You know what I mean? I like that. It makes it feel like though you're watching something almost realistic, it skirts realism. It's totally supernatural. It's like
shit out of left field comes in. You're like,
it's like David Lynch. Like Twin Peaks, you know what I mean? Yeah. Kind of like Control in that respect, except I think this is much better.
It seems normal, but with like a sprinkle of supernatural. Then kind of
the
like
world's like
blows
ripped
apart.
Open. Yeah.
It's cool for sure.
Yeah, like what in Metal Gear Solid 3, like the end there, he's like, he's almost dead, so he's just sleeping until it's time for him to fight. Like, what are you talking about? It's all those times you're like, it's just totally.
It's goofy, and there's weird things you can do, like leave your system on for like a bit, and he'll eventually just die because he's so old. Like,
but the way that they talk, though, it's like actually when you read the, like ancient myths and like Hesiod's talking about how like Athena, the goddess of wisdom, is born. He's born out of Zeus's head. She came out of there, and like in a Kojima game, somebody would say something like that. Right?
Exactly. And it doesn't seem like it's out of
this mythologization of the 20th century and its technologies and its aesthetic. I really do like that. So that's Kojima, and as I said, I think Miyazaki airs stylistically in totally other side, like
the other direction.
If Kojima's gaze is always like if your gaze is always curated in a Kojima game, in a Miyazaki game, nothing is curated for you. You know, the world is like totally independent of it doesn't care about you at all. Like
dropped it.
Yeah, you're just there. Yeah. Like it's indifferent to you entirely.
Yeah. Oh,
you know? And in that respect, I think Miyazaki games are the most game-ish of games.
Yeah.
You know?
It's like a whole, like, dropping you into a combat puzzle. Like
I think like what distinguishes games from other media is that when you play a game, you know, the way the representation occurs is you occupy the some entity in the world and you perform their being. You know, you perform the world into existence from the vantage of this character. It's an active participation in the thing. And I think I think that games can be different, and it's not that it has to be this way or it has to be that way. But in a Kojima game, you sacrifice some of what makes a game, and I don't think this matters because the matter is for the sake of the form. The mechanics are for conveying the idea. You don't have to make a gamey game, but it is an interesting observation that, you know, while Kojima relies on conventions from another medium to convey his point, Miyazaki leans into the gamishness of it, you know?
Yeah,
you have to interact with the world, and that's your only means of, even the cinematics, they're just vague images. You don't really understand much from those alone, right?
True, yeah. They're all like just in-engine short cutscenes, not much.
They're like, again, mythic scenes or something like that. You're like, what? It's a metaphor or what's going on, right? Like, this I remember the last boss of Elden Ring seeing there, what's her name, Radagon floating there and like crucified, and you're like, I don't know, is she trying to tell me something? Like, So the world is always conveyed in this disinterested, a manner that seems indifferent to you. You know, your gaze is not curated, and that's in that sense stylistically. You know, people talk about environmental storytelling and this and that, but I think that the way the representation takes place is by your interaction with the world. You can't get around it with cinematics and storytelling conventions.
You can't like watch it on YouTube and say, I've seen it all.
The point is to interact with the world, and I think the combat system, which everybody knows and loves from Miyazaki, you know, it exemplifies it accentuates this because it forces you to learn about the boss that you're fighting by memorizing their patterns, understanding the sounds they're going to make, the things they do. Like you have to get an intimate, it feels like when you walk into a difficult boss in a Souls-like game, you're so like confused. You don't know what's going on.
You don't know what to do at first. You're kind of like, you know.
But then after a few attempts, after an hour maybe, time goes by, you start to learn everything about the character. It's like you are dancing with them. You understand. You learn something about the character through your interactions with them and not by what they're telling you or any other thing, right? So I think the combat system, as well as the way the story's delivered environmentally, they both support each other in this. They're gamish. And, you know, his world building too, it's unique because we talked about this before, how it's persistent even in Armored Core 6. There's always this figure who attempts to live forever by seizing some divine principle. You know, like Gwyn or the corporations in Armored Core 6 or what's his name? The Ashina clan in Sekiro there. They're always trying to seize immortality from the gods and perpetuate their family or their race or their individual selves beyond what's natural. And when they break the order of being, like a mortal attempting to divinize himself, and because of that, the whole world
wrong.
The whole world falls apart, right? And it's up to this character to go and restart the cycle of life and death or something like that in each instance, or to, like in Sekiro, like restore the divine dragon to its place in the West or something. It's always this trope of like human beings attempting to illicitly overcome human nature, but that goes wrong. But then, you know, he does suggest always there's a better way to do it. There is a way to accomplish this. Like you're reborn as a slug at the end of Bloodborne, or you know, the divine child becomes, like the dragon becomes enshrined in the divine child's body, and you can take it home. It's always like, it's never bleak. You know, I guess I'm trying to say. He always like he seems to suggest what he thinks the wrong way to behave in the world is, but he doesn't think that everything is for naught. That makes sense. He always does suggest a way to overcome the human condition. So I think that's definitely not something you can find. Like these kinds of ideas that we're talking about right now, like you can't find that kind of stuff in something that doesn't proceed from the mind of one person, right?
No,
the kind of persistent themes, and even
wouldn't have that kind of cohesion, right?
Yes, exactly so. And I think like these two guys out of the way, it gets much more difficult to sit there and say, because what they do, man, you know, they direct the game, they conceive the game, they write the game, they're involved in almost every.
They got their hands in almost everything, probably except for like, you know, coding and stuff. Actually, maybe Miyazaki a little bit, but regardless, anyway, it doesn't matter. They have like a top-down view essentially, and nothing is no decisions are made that don't go through them.
At this point, we're probably obliged to say that Kojima and Miyazaki are, to my estimation, in a class of their own.
Yeah.
When it comes to people who make video games.
Yeah.
We've spoken before about how they're unique for both managing a company in terms of its finances and business interests. At the same time, you know, creatively participating in the making of games. So in their hands, there's a unique confluence of material and creative interest that we usually don't get to see at the AAA scale. And on top of that, they're intimately involved in most aspects of the game's design and production. You know, I know both Kojima and Miyazaki direct, write.
Which is, I mean, they do things that are typically not heard of, and that's, I guess, why they're in the position they're in. Right?
They're in unique positions, and it's probably because they have their hands in almost every aspect of the game design. There have been co-directors and people who've helped them, but they stand alone, to my estimation, in this pantheon of video game authors. And there's definitely more people to mention.
Though we do have more on the list that I wouldn't put them up, you know, in the same, I guess, breadth of Kojima and Miyazaki, but they stand on their own, you know.
Yes, they still are authors, I believe, whose concepts come through in the work, though they may have more remote involvement in its production. You know, their hands aren't as dirty, you could say.
Right.
Yeah. Though their concepts are still clear and powerful in many cases. I think that they're going to be worth discussing in another video.
Absolutely.
Part 2 of video game authors. In this instance, remember Kojima and Miyazaki as archetypes of what this means, right? Like they show how it's possible, though video games are made with a team of people, for each work to exemplify an organic totality of meaning that proceeds from the mind of one person. They're masters of their craft. Thank you guys very much for tuning in, and probably talk to you next week.
Oh yeah.